So today's video is going to be about changing your brake discs and brake pads on your vehicle. We will only be going through the process on one corner of the vehicle. It applies to every corner. We are going through the process of taking off your wheel all the way to putting your wheel back on and everything in between that you will need to know to change your brake pads and brake discs from the comfort of your own home. However, it is slightly more advanced than just changing your oil, so please be careful when doing so.
We're going to demonstrate the removal of the car wheel. The first thing we need to establish is the tools that are required for the job. We need a wrench, we need the security socket for the wheels. So you have a combination set for the wheel sockets and a pick to remove the center cap. So in the center cap and a slight tug, and we reveal the wheel bolts. So now we need to figure out which of the combinations fit into this security bolt. So now we use the wrench. Always keep in mind to hold the wheel against the hub in case it just falls off. So, quite easy. And now the wheel has been removed.
So first, you're going to want to relieve the brake pressure from the brake caliper itself. So you want to get a flat screwdriver and wedge that in between the brake disc and the brake pad to pull the old brake pad away from the disc. Doesn't matter if you scratch the disc since it's being replaced anyway. Now you're going to want two spanners, one ring, one open end. Sizes of these spanners will vary depending on the vehicle, but it will be quite tight at first. It should be tight. If it's not, then it's actually quite worrying. It means that bolt is already loose and possibly backing itself out. So it's good that you caught it in time, otherwise your brakes may have failed. After some time you will notice the bolt starting to get quite loose. At this point you will probably be able to take it out by hand, as I did. Now we're on to the bottom bolt of the caliper. This is much the same process as the previous one. You just put the two spanners on, loosen it, it'll be quite tight, and eventually it will come off. Just a matter of time and labor. Also, these bolts may vary in length, so it's important you remember which bolt goes where so that you put it back in the right place. And now that the bolt is out, you can see me removing the caliper from the brake disc and wheel carrier. You just let it hang in most cases. The brake pads may come out with the brake caliper, but not always. They might still be stuck on the brake disc, in which case you just get the same screwdriver as earlier and pry them apart from the brake disc. So now that the brake pads have been removed, we're one step closer to getting access to the brake disc itself. But first we need to remove the brake pad guide, and in order to do this there's two more bolts at the back which we need to gain access to and remove. Once these have been removed, we can then remove the guide and take the brake disc straight off. Now that we have both of the bolts or screws loose, we can now remove the mount or guide off of the wheel carrier and now take the brake disc straight off. However, it is a very large and heavy piece of metal, so please take caution not to drop it onto your feet when working with it, and place it carefully on the floor. Now we can see the wheel hub, and at the back of the wheel hub you can see the ABS clock, which is what allows the ABS sensors to see if that wheel has locked and allowed to reduce the braking pressure to that wheel, allowing your ABS system to work. Not important, the brake change, just an interesting fact. But we do need to clean the face of the wheel hub before installing the new brake disc, because any contaminants and surface rust will create an uneven mounting surface for the brake disc, and this will mean it's not mounted flat. So to do this job, we use a drill with a wire brush and go to town on the face of the wheel hub. And as you can see, when I take the drill off, it's much cleaner than before, and now the brake disc has a nice flat surface to mount to, and it won't warp or shudder when you press your brakes. And now we need to clean the rest of the wheel hub. To do this, we just take a wire brush and we clean around the entire circumference of the wheel hub, putting some nice elbow grease in. This is just cosmetic. It's not entirely vital to your braking system per se. It's just good practice for since you have the brake disc off and you can access this area. And once you're done with the wheel hub, you can move on to the wheel carrier. Again, this is just for cosmetic reasons, it's not really vital. What is more vital is the brake caliper itself, as this is where the brake pads sit and slide, so it's better to keep this clean if you do only clean one.
Here we have a special tool. We use that to compress this piston. By compressing the piston, we open this gap to give space for the new brake pads, because the new brake pads are thicker than the old ones. So we put this tool into here. And it doesn't work. Okay, because I forgot to put something on.
Once the piston is fully compressed, you can stop, as it won't go any further. This is how far the piston must be compressed before installing new brake pads. Now it's time to install the brake disc itself. This one's black, yours will probably be silver. Over time this one will go silver on the friction surface, but it's painted black to protect other areas of the brake disc from corrosion and rust. Usually you have a screw that holds the brake disc to the wheel hub, which in this case we don't have, so we have to use a wheel nut to hold it in place while we put the brake carrier back on the car. So it's important to keep all of your braking components clean. So in this case, I have the brake carrier and a wire brush and I'm doing the same job as earlier on the brake carrier before installing it on the vehicle. So, as you can see here, these two bolts are different lengths, which is why I said earlier to remember which bolt goes where if you do have two different length bolts. As if I put the shorter bolt in where the longer bolt is meant to be, it won't thread all the way in, and the longer bolt would stick out from where the shorter bolt goes. In this case, the shorter bolt goes on top, which is generally the case, but please make sure when you take them off which one goes where. And it's a bit of a faff to figure out where the hole is, but you will find it eventually, and you just need to make sure they line up before putting the bolts in, otherwise they don't go in and your brake caliper falls off while you're driving. So once the bolt's too tight to turn more by hand, you can then get the tool out that you're using to take them off and tighten them until you can't anymore. Now we are going to be using copper grease, which can be bought from any local car parts supplier, and you can only use copper grease in this scenario. And this has the purpose of reducing friction between the brake caliper and the brake pad. So you don't want to put too much, otherwise it will just smear onto the brake disc, which reduces the friction, which is not what you want. You want friction from your brakes. So you want to make sure that there's nothing lubricating your brake disc against your brake pad. However, you do want the sliding metal of the brake caliper and brake pad not to resist each other, to ensure that you have adequate braking power without any squealing. So if you notice any squealing from your brakes, it's likely that they are dirty or don't have enough grease. And now we have the brake pads. This is the rear pair of brake pads for both left and right side, and they are all identical in this case, but sometimes they might not be identical. The inner brake pad, so the one furthest away from the outside of the wheel, has a backing plate on it on this car, and these brake pads don't come with the new backing plate, so we must reuse the original backing plate from the old brake pads. Although we do have some new caliper screws, which is very nice. And now we have the old backing plate, and on the contact points I want to put new copper grease on and just spread it around a little bit just to get some nice even coverage. And now when picking up the old brake pad, it's important to not get any copper grease on the pad surface itself that will contact the brake disc. Otherwise, as I said earlier, you get less friction between the pad and the disc, which is not what we want. Now I'm going to insert the pad between the brake mount and the brake disc. Now it's only the inside that has the backing plate on this car, so the outside doesn't have a backing plate. It just goes in like so, and then the caliper goes on top of that. However, before we put the caliper on, we need to go again with the copper grease just on the contact points between the pad and the caliper and on the piston itself, and this is all to prevent any brake squeal and any friction within the braking system other than between the disc and the pad. And on the piston, you can just spread it around with your finger. It's ideal to wear gloves in this situation, and I chose not to. All you need is some very good hand soap at home. And now we're installing the new bolts to mount the brake caliper to the brake caliper mount. Although it's difficult, it must be threaded in by hand to prevent cross-threading of the bolt or the thread. It must always be the top bolt that comes first in the caliper, and then the bottom bolt second. And again, it must be threaded in by hand only. So once the bolts are tight enough by hand, we can repeat the process that we did taking them off. And that's just with the two spanners, and tighten them essentially until they can't tighten anymore. Once both bolts are back in and tight, the brake installation is now complete, and the only thing left to do is to repeat the process on all four corners. Now you can see my father doing the exact same process that I walked you through on the other side of the car, where he's taken the old brake disc off, and you can see the new one, and he's just going about it as if he would normally changing a customer's brakes. The only difference will be is that if your vehicle has drum brakes, this video is not applicable. Some vehicles have both drum and disc brakes, so in this case this video is only applicable to where the vehicle utilizes disc brakes. But there are other video tutorials online on the same platform you're on now watching this, where they will demonstrate how to change drum brakes and shoes.
Now we're ready to put the wheel back on. We first make sure that we locate the wheel bolt holes with the brake disc, otherwise you won't be able to get the wheel bolts back in. I've already done that. So as you can see in there, all the holes are lined up nicely. I always put the security bolt opposite the tire valve, so that when it's dark and I need to change my wheel, I'm able to find the security bolt easily. Start the bolts by hand. And we just run them in gently, not too tight. And we do the final tightening with a tool called a torque wrench.
So whether you're taking the wheels off for any reason at all, even when it's not to do with your brakes, you must always torque your wheels to the correct specification afterward. So on an analog torque wrench, this dial is what's used to set the torque specification at which it will click to let you know you're at that torque specification. You can also see a digital torque wrench demonstrated in one of our earlier videos. Here we have the locking nut adapter, which is the one that is tightened first. One mistake that some people make when torquing their wheels down is that they torque their wheels in a circle. So they go from one bolt to the one next to it, which is incorrect. You are meant to torque the wheels in a star pattern to ensure that the wheel is seated evenly on the hub. Hopefully you found that video both helpful and entertaining, and hopefully you will make use of it soon. I want to thank you for watching my YouTube series, all the basic car maintenance videos included within it, especially this longer video. And thank you for watching this one, even if it's the only one you've watched, and goodbye.